How much fat you can store safely has a huge genetic influence. Where you put your fat, however.
Introducing world-renowned weight loss scientist, Professor Giles Yeo, Professor of Molecular Neuroendocrinology at the University of Cambridge.
Your brain hates it when you lose weight. We have 1,000 genes that influence why and what and where and how much we eat.
Why is it so easy to put on weight and so hard to lose weight and keep it off?
Okay, that's a $64 million question. I think in casino terms, the house always wins.
His research has focused on the influence of genes on feeding behaviours and body weight.
We need to make the healthy choice the default choice. Your metabolism ramps up to around your 18 to 20-year-old and then sort of sticks around till your 40s and 50s and then begins to dip. It turns out this is not true.
You've touched on it, Ozempic.
Now, so that...
Hello everyone and welcome back to Vision of Health, the podcast where I talk to qualified experts about what being healthy really looks like in everyday life. I'm Dr. Frankie Jackson-Spence. I'm a medical doctor specialising in cancer research. My mission is to bridge the gap between science and real life, offering you practical advice to help you improve your lifestyle that is actually backed by the evidence. I'm Dr. Frankie, and this is my Vision of Health. When discussing the fundamental pillars of our health, we inevitably can't avoid talking about obesity, and it's becoming an increasing problem with 27% of adults in the UK being obese and a further 36% of adults in the UK being overweight. Taking how we look out of it, is being obese or overweight as big a problem for our health as we're led to believe? Introducing world-renowned weight loss scientist, Professor Giles Yeo. Professor Giles Yeo, welcome to Vision of Health.
Dr. Frankie, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I know you travelled quite the journey this morning and it's not the most particularly sunny day in London, so really do appreciate your time.
It's all right. I'm glad to be here.
Can you give us a background to your speciality and your research in this space?
So I'm a geneticist by trade. I train as a geneticist, and I am interested in body weight, on which one end of the spectrum just happens to sit obesity. Mm-hmm. So I studied the genetics of obesity for that matter, because that's the disease side of things. And we now know that the genetics of body weight, which we can get to, is by its very definition the genetics of how our brain influences our feeding behavior. So ultimately, I'm an accidental neuroscientist. I study how the brain controls food intake through the prism and lens of genetics.
So interesting. That must be such a fulfilling and rewarding career because it really affects so many people. So you just know that the research you're doing is having such an impact, which must be a great feeling.
Well, it is a great feeling. I mean, there's a couple of things. I'd like to think I'm having an impact. The upside is everyone is interested in it.
Yeah.
The downside is everyone is interested in it, which means everyone has an opinion.
Yeah.
Which is fine, actually. But I guess the problem is because I study how the brain controls food intake, and we are all, by definition, experts at food intake, because we're here having this conversation, we know how much to eat, when to eat and stuff, that everyone, therefore, thinks that they're an expert at eating and, crucially, judges everyone else and how they eat based on how individually how we feel and how we eat. So there are pluses and minuses.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I really wanted to cover this topic, obviously because it affects so many aspects of our health. But there is so much judgment and opinion and emotion around it. And I do find as a clinician, the topic of body weight and obesity is a really sensitive one because I think inherently in healthcare, we do tend to fat shame. And I think there is a real lack of understanding of why people eat a certain way and why people have kind of different body shapes and things. So I can't wait to delve into it. Why did you choose specifically to focus on genetics of obesity and food in this way?
Okay, as with most things in life, this wasn't some master plan. It was by chance.
Yeah.
I did my PhD actually on the genetics of the Japanese pufferfish. Don't go there. It was a very niche topic, and I didn't think that it was going to pay my mortgage. So what happened was when I was finished, but I was trained as a geneticist, molecular geneticist, I needed a job, and so what I ended up doing was I knocked on doors in departments, and the second door I knocked on was a chap named Stephen Ratley, Professor Sir Stephen Ratley now, who had just identified the first couple of genes that, when mutated, cause severe obesity in children. And he was collecting kids with severe obesity, and he needed a geneticist. And literally, I was just some dude that knocked on the door. I was a geneticist. He called in my references. I didn't have two heads. And so I ended up starting my career studying the genetics of severe early onset obesity with genes when mutated cause severe obesity. I had a couple of hits early on in my career, stuck with it, and went from studying not only genetics of severe obesity, which is what I still do study, but now the whole range of body weight as well. That's how I got into it, just by chance.
Yeah, well, it's similar to how I got into my research. It's always who you meet and which.
That's right.
Which are the right doors to knock on, I guess. Yeah. So starting with the problem, I know you mentioned that obesity is just one end of the spectrum. Can you explain to our listeners what obesity actually is?
So that is, I think, more nuanced than people expect. I mean, what do people think? BMI, body mass index, above 30. Now that is, if you look in your clinical textbooks, that's what it says, above 30. But that really is just a number on a scale. So I think a better description of obesity, a more accepted description of obesity, is carrying too much fat that it begins to influence your health. And so if you look at it from that spectrum, through that prism, then obesity is not so good for you. However, I think the key question to ask is how much fat is too much fat? And can I carry as much fat as someone else? And I think that's probably where the nuance comes in.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head, really, because it takes the judgment of kind of how we look out of it, and it shows that everyone's individual. That point of, how much fat is too much fat for you, for it to be not healthy anymore. So when we talk about body weight, as you mentioned, we assess the degree of fat tissue by body mass index. And I know there are some elements of that are problematic, but how were these levels deemed healthy versus not healthy? Why isn't it better to have more fat stores?
Now, so I guess why is having obesity bad for you? Let's go. Why don't we start with that?
Yeah.
And ultimately, actually, while you do have issues with the obesity per se, there are issues with gravity. So you could end up with arthritis. There are problems with sleep apnea. And you can't move, mobility, stigma. Uncomfortable, I'm not belittling it, but it's seldom what kills you. What kills you is the host of a bunch of nasty diseases that are comorbidities with obesity: type 2 diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, Alzheimer's, high cholesterol levels, blah, 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 all that stuff. That's what kills you. Now, the safest place to store fat is in your fat. Because it's your fat storage organ. But people make the mistake to thinking that actually that when I gain weight, I gain fat cells, and I lose weight, I lose fat cells. And that's not true. Your fat cells are like balloons. They get bigger when you lose weight, when you gain weight, and they get smaller when you lose weight. And the safest place, as I say, to store fat is within these fat cells. The problem comes is when you end up with these fat cells that can't store fat anymore, then the fat's got to go somewhere else. It's when the fat is not in fat and it ends up in your liver, in your muscles, that is when you tilt into disease. So ultimately, when we talk about the diseases that are associated with obesity, it's because the fat that are supposed to be in your fat, you have too much of it, is now somewhere else. And that is what ends up causing most of the diseases and most of the bad stuff that happens when you have obesity.
So when you said before about what the level of fat is that becomes potentially dangerous for you, do people have different capacities to store fat?
Hugely. So there's two things, right? There's fat expandability, so how big the balloons can get and where you put your fat, on your bum, on your tummy, apple shape, pear shape, famously. So those two things mixed together give you indicate how much fat that you can store so safely. So famously, East Asian people that look like me, South Asian people, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, cannot get that heavy before we tilt into risk for type 2 diabetes, for example, compared to white people, compared to famously Polynesians, who can get enormous, right, before they actually tilt twice the size, actually, of a South Asian individual, for example, before they tilt into a similar risk for type 2 diabetes. So the range is actually quite large, where how much fat you can store safely has a huge genetic influence, and that makes a big difference to your risk of a disease.
And I think that's interesting then, isn't it? Because we use these generic cutoffs for people of this being healthy versus not. And actually it is so much more individual than that. How could people kind of assess their own individual risk better? Because I know things like BMI are great on a population level, but if someone was assessing whether they truly need to lose weight or not, how would you say they should actually assess that?
So, I think there is that okay, that's a $64 million question. I think it is at the cutting edge at the moment. I think eventually, I'd like to think we will get to a situation where we could assess it genetically first to actually identify high risk. And there's a lot of work being, not by me personally, but a lot of work underlying this space at the moment. But that's a little, or you can get yourself scanned for the amount of fat using either what we call DEXA or MRI, but that is A, expensive, and B, you got to do it in a special clinic. I think they're shortcuts. So you're right, BMI is free, but it's a population average, and famously, rugby players or The Rock or someone like that has a high BMI. I think there is a shortcut, and that is to do your BMI, which is weight in kilos divided by your height in meters square, and also take your waist size. Because if you have a BMI of 30 and, oh my God, he's obese, right? But then you have a waist size of 32, you do the math and says, well, clearly you must be, because it's not around your stomach or it's somewhere else. Even better, if you can do your waist to hip ratio. So circumference of your waist over the circumference of your hip, that gives you your body shape, right? Because if you've got a big tummy and a skinny waist, that looks like a beer belly. If you've got a skinny waist and a big bum, that's actually relatively healthier for you. So I think those are probably shortcuts that we could do now. Ultimately, though, I think you sort of kind of, depressing though it is, look at your parents. Now, if your parents are still alive, what do they look like? Do they have any diseases? If your parents are not, what did they die of? It's a depressing thing to talk about, but actually, that is probably more predictive than any genetic test we have at the moment into what's coming down the road for you. But BMI and in your waist, and that will give you a good idea whether or not you should or should not lose weight.
So talk to me a bit there about why the body shape makes a difference. Why does the distribution of fat matter?
So originally, when we first started studying this, people said, oh, it's because the fat around the organs is closer to the organs. Okay, there was this argument, and actually that probably was fine, but that's not the answer. The visceral fat, so it's not even only where, right? Because the visceral fat is fat that is closer to the organs, okay? And subcutaneous fat, so fat that's actually under the skin, tends to land, is what gives you the wobble factor here, is what gives you a big bum, what have you, tends to be safer. And we know it's different fat because in mouse studies, what they've done is they've taken the visceral fat from the mouse and given the mouse a booty. They've kind of like stuck it onto the backside of a mouse, and it has equally bad effects. Right. It doesn't matter where it is in a mouse, it's just got to be there.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the reason why this matters is because if you have more visceral fat, men tend to have this, not exclusively, but tend to have that, then that tends to be metabolically, from cardiovascular or diabetes risk, worse for you. It's the type of fat that it is, giving off different types of hormones and cytokines and things.
So genetically, are we more likely to store fat in different places? Because people have different body shapes. You know, if I compare myself to my mum, completely different body shapes, she just does not store fat. Definitely has different attitudes to food, just not really that bothered. Whereas I'm much more of the like traditional curvy figure. And so I always think there must be a genetic difference there for there to be such stark differences.
So we have to sort of divide body shape and body size into two components, because there are genetics to body size, which is what I study, and there are genetics to body shape. And interestingly, they don't overlap. So the genetics of body shape, so whether or not you got a big bum or a small tum, big bum, do we look like a sausage? Okay, so it's where you put your fat, has absolutely nothing to do with how much fat you carry.
Yes.
And how much fat you carry is very complex. We're going to talk about that because it has to do with food intake. Where you put your fat, however, has to do with fat biology. How much fat can you store, the expandability, where you actually lay it down. And it actually has very, very, very little environmental role to play. So your body shape, because you can be skinny and have a big bum, or fat and have a big bum.
Yeah.
And so your body shape is so powerfully genetically influenced. There's almost nothing you can do about it. When I am at either Stansted or Heathrow for an early morning 6 a.m. flight, and I'm there with my latte, right? And then what happens is I like to, not minding my own business, I like to people watch. And you can just tell, I mean, you see a family, summer vacation coming soon, you see a family and you sort of look, like Mr. Potato Head. You can look and say, look, this one, so say normal nuclear family, father, mother, son, daughter, who looks like who, what looks like who. Body shape is powerfully influenced by genetics.
Yeah.
And incidentally, that also means that where you want to burn it off, when you go to your booty busting class or you want to do that, dude, it doesn't work.
I know.
So what happens is you lose fat from where you're going to lose fat from. Doing sit-ups is not going to specifically remove fat from your midriff.
I know, and it drives me mad because people go to the gym and they put all this hard work in, and I honestly want to shout from the rooftops that the benefits for their health go far beyond what they're trying to do to change their body. And you can look on the front cover of a magazine and see someone who seemingly looks healthy and they have a small waist and a big bum, and that's kind of the idealistic body shape at the moment, apparently. And some people will never get there, and they could be an extreme athlete and super healthy and will never look like that. And then they think that their kind of fitness and exercise endeavors are a failure. And it's just, I'm so glad you said it, that it's you basically can't really change your body shape.
You can't change your body shape. It is what it is. I mean, we're running up to the Olympics now, right? I mean, I love watching. I mean, I'm a bit of a sports nut watching it. I love watching the Olympics because of all the body shapes and sizes that comes from whatever it is you're doing. The shot putter will never, it's perfectly healthy and will never be able to do something else. That doesn't mean that they're unhealthy.
So we're kind of assuming here that our listeners understand why having an excess body fat or being obese is bad for our health. Can you just summarize that? Why it is such a problem for our health?
So it is such a problem for your health because when you have too much fat, fat is no longer in your fat cells, and they end up in places which are not designed to store fat at high levels. This includes your muscle, your liver. You end up with fatty liver, it's like a foie gras, and your pancreas. There are a number of places you go. And the moment you have what we call ectopic fat, so fat that's not meant to be there, it begins to influence the function of that tissue. So in diabetes, for example, it's a major issue of insulin resistance. So your muscle can't actually function properly to uptake glucose. And that's because it's packed full of fat. Same for your liver. That's where you get fatty liver disease, where you got problems with that. So that's the reason why you end up having fat in tissues which are not designed to store large amounts of fat.
And what I think so unfair about that is if being overweight or having excess body fat is so bad for us, why is it so easy to put on weight and so hard to lose weight and keep it off?
Now we've got to look at evolution, okay? Because for the vast majority of human evolution, we never had enough food. The vast majority, okay? Even when we had agriculture 12,000 years ago, it was sort of a scrabbling existence. And so ultimately, I think there is a huge drive to store food for later, eat food when it is there. That's the big drive. Now, clearly the main issue we have today, and I would say the issue is probably only 40 years old, plus or minus. You can turn on a 1970s, 50 years old, a 1970s TV program, everyone is skinny. And your eyes are not deceiving you. They were not body shaming people then. That's because that's how society was. And so it's the rapid change in the food environment, A, and B, the kind of stuff we do, the kind of work we do. We have dishwashers, we have washing machines that put together, and the type of food we eat that have then really put us in a position where, so we were designed for a feast-famine environment. That's what we were designed to do, okay? Sometimes you had the antelope, sometimes you didn't have the antelope. The problem is we're now living in a feast environment, that most of us are, and that's what's causing us problems.
I think it's really hard because there's so much pointing the finger at someone making bad choices, and I think we really neglect how much the environment can set us up for failure. Even if you don't think you're eating very much, the things that you're eating can just not do the right things. Like I have this in clinic all the time when I ask patients a lot about their diet, which is probably slight out of the remit of what I need to do, but I always think cancer nutrition is often neglected conversation. And I'll say to people like, what do you eat? Talk to me about your eating. And they go, I don't eat very much. But you realize that what they are eating is really calorie dense, but it might be a really small portion. So their mental state is that they don't eat very much. And that's really hard to kind of get into and unpick and retrain behaviors. Before you said there's two things that we need to think about, which is body shape and amount of body fat. Do you think being overweight is down to poor food choices?
I don't think it's a choice. And you might think, well, really? People choose to go to buy the pizza? You choose to put the extra thing in? I think you got to look at it in this way. So leaving the body shape out of it now, because that's a very separate conversation and we've had. But in terms of body size, as I said, we now know that it is how your brain influences feeding behavior. And it's not a single gene. We know it's nearly 1,000 genes that play a role. Okay. And ultimately, this is the way that I conceptualize it, where whether or not I choose to eat the extra slice of pizza at any given thing might seem like a choice, and it is, you have to remember that we don't gain or lose weight overnight. So in other words, this choice is not actually going to measurably, at any rate, change my behavior. Even when you have the Christmas meal, it's not going to measurably change your body weight. Your body weight is a function of thousands of feeding decisions, feeding events that you have made over the past couple of years, okay? Mm-hmm. But imagine if because of your genetic hand of cards, and you want to consider them like a hand of cards, you're given to you, from your folks. That's the only people you can really blame are your folks, because that's where they've come from. You have a little bit of a chance less to say no. 5%. That's the kind of range we're looking at. So 1 out of every 20 times, someone else might say, oh, hang it, I'll have that slice of pizza. Okay. 1 out of every 20 times, over thousands of meals, is hundreds of thousands of calories. So over the period of time where feeding begins to demonstrably change your body weight, it is not a choice. I think in casino terms, the house always wins if your die is weighted a certain way. So I think that's the way we have to think about it, because it's not like people with obesity are eating twice as much. That just doesn't happen. People are eating probably 5% as much. And unlike other physiological measurements that we make, blood glucose, blood pressure, temperature, okay, fat is cumulative. The moment you have a little bit of extra, it's stuck in you and stays in you. And so even just a little bit extra over a year, 2, 3, you end up gaining weight. That's the nuance.
And do you think there's a genetic element to the answer you're likely to give when faced with that decision of do you want more over those long periods? So you're saying that some people will 1 in 20 times say, yes, I'll have another slice of pizza, and that's going to have a cumulative effect on their body fat. Do you think there is genetic differences in whether you're more likely to overeat or not?
Yes, ultimately. And not only that, because I think you got to, I guess like I said, we have 1,000 genes that influence why and what and where and how much we eat. But these genes cover a huge gamut of things. I mean, it could be hunger, growly tummy, the way we're talking about, that we understand from a day-to-day basis. It could be, I need more food to become full, which sounds like it is related, but different circuitry. Okay. It could be, I have a reward portion of my brain that needs more tickling. It could be because I like yellow M's on motorways. Okay. It could be because I eat when I get stressed. That's a classic example, right? You can divide the world into two. People who eat when they're stressed and people who stop eating when they're stressed.
Which one are you?
I'm definitely a stress eater.
I am completely opposite. Food tastes like cardboard when I'm stressed. I can
tell. Whereas me, my face, without wanting to back myself into a stereotype, my face is in a bowl of noodles the moment I'm stressed. And why?
At airports, I heard this.
At airports, exactly. But the question is why, right? It's the same hormone that goes up. Cortisol goes up. Yeah. Why the diametric opposite responses? So things like this, those are where the genes lie. It's not only hunger. It's not only willpower, for lack of a better term, whatever that actually means. It is a whole repertoire of different behaviors around how ultimately you decide, quote unquote, to pick up the pizza and put it in your mouth. But it is so complex, the reasons underlying why. And those are just the genetic reasons. What happens if you're poorer? What happens if you work shifts? What happens if you have a child? What happens if you are vegetarian? Blah, blah, blah. There's a bazillion things you can do that then goes in, that is external, that then influence as well these genes and why you make the final decision to take the bite of pizza.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because people label this as like fat and skinny genes, but it sounds like there's lots more than one gene having a factor to play in it.
It's a lot more than one gene. About 1,000. And when I first started, actually, doing the genetics of severe obesity, we and within the community, we're asking, what happens if you go to the other end of the spectrum? You look at eating disorders, for example. If you look at anorexia, is anorexia nervosa the opposite of some of these severe obesity genes that we're studying? And as it turns out, it's not. Now we understand that in someone who has an eating disorder, they have all the hallmarks and signals of someone who is malnourished and not eating enough, but they have a brain that can ignore it. Okay, so we have to take that out of the sort of normal spectrum equation. Whereas when you actually look at someone who's healthily thin, like just normally lean because of that's the way they are, and someone who is large, okay, then you end up and you look at the genes. Look, we have all these genes. They're not mutated for most of us. They're not mutated. They're just different variations of the gene. And you've got to kind of look at these genes as you have versions that make you a little bit heavier and versions that make you a little bit lighter. And if you sum them up, if you add those 1,000 genes up and say, well, how many of the heavier version versus the light version you have? If you have more of the heavier ones, you're more likely to be heavy, and vice versa. So it's a full spectrum. When we talk about the genetics of body weight, I mean just that. So people think, oh, I'm studying the genetics of only why people get fat, what percentage, No, genetics influences your body weight across the entire spectrum.
And are there genetic differences then between how men and women store fat? Because you hear a lot. It's so interesting to me when we go through puberty, for example, men, the attitude to young boys is, oh, they're growing boys, you need to give them double portions of dinner. But then you get a female going through puberty and their body's changing, they're putting on body fat, they're growing breasts or their hips widen and things like that. And the societal approach is completely the opposite. And it's this resistance for girls to put on the weight. And we're told to be thin, be thin, be thin. So it's interesting to me how the kind of males have this increased metabolism, in quotes, whereas women also may have something different going on, different distribution and storage of fat. And the approach is so different. Are there differences there?
There are going to be differences. So if you look at, that's actually a more complex question than you might imagine. There are going to be sex-independent genetic drivers of body weight that are going to be the same between you and me. Okay, and we know some of them, how you sense fat, how you sense, respond to gut hormones, that kind of things. There are not going to be any sexual differences, okay? Where the differences come in tend to, not exclusively, but tend to relate to hormones, necessarily. Obviously, the big differences between men and women are going to be the repertoire of hormones. And you can have a look at actually the life scale. Look, men are very simple creatures. We get born, we think about food, we think about the other thing. That's it, then we die. That's the only thing. Women, however, assuming that a woman has chosen to have a child post-puberty, then I would argue there are 4 different women that you could be. Okay, you could be the pre-pregnant woman, the woman who is pregnant, who is a completely different species, but that because they're trying to keep alive a parasite for 9 months in them. I'm a dad, I can say. There's the woman post-pregnancy. We know women that like rubber bands and snap back after that. The women that don't never lose the baby fat. And the woman post-menopause. And what each of those 4 stages are marked with are massive changes in hormones, huge changes in hormones, huge changes for many people in body shape. And so menopause, just as an example, I'm going to teach grandmas how to suck eggs here, but as your estrogen levels fall away, what happens is you then get a ratio that changes between your estrogen, your female hormones, versus testosterone. Women have testosterone, just a lot less. But this change in ratio, what we call androgenizes your hormone levels. In other words, you become looking a bit more male. It's not really. But that's why for a large percentage of women who go into the menopause, they change body shape. Suddenly, you have a post-menopausal shape, but you change body shape by doing nothing different except by going into the menopause. And that's a classic example where your baseline genetics are the same, okay? But you change some hormonal level and suddenly your body shape, boom, completely changes. Nothing you can do about it.
I think that's a really difficult position to be in as well, especially for women in this day and age that are going through menopause because they've grown up with the magazines telling you to look a certain way. So there is differences between men and women because obviously men in general have a lower body fat percentage. When you go to the gym and we'd measure body fat, it's staggering how a seemingly in shape female could have a certain body fat percentage. But if a man had that body fat percentage, they may look a lot bigger. And also you touched there on how it can change over your lifespan. So what happens as we age? Because we all hear that, oh, I can't eat what I used to be able to eat. My metabolism has slowed down. Is that true?
You know, if you asked me this question 4 or 5 years ago, I would have given you a slightly different answer. But
That's
this
the
field
beauty
is
of science.
Exactly. This field is actually going so much. So let me tell you what we used to think. Is that your metabolism sort of ramps up to around your 18 to 20-year-old, your peak, okay, and then sort of sticks around till your 40s and 50s, and then begins to dip. This was for the longest time the view. Turns out this is not true. The first bit's true. It goes up in 18 to 20. It actually sticks around your metabolism, your basal metabolic rate, the rate at which you use your fuel, sticks around the same per muscle mass, per gram of muscle, till around 65 before it begins to drop.
Wow.
Now, but the critical thing there is per muscle gram. And what happens is, as you get older, we're set on our backsides more because we do different types of jobs. Some people do remain fit, but I certainly am carrying more fat now than when I was younger for a whole host of different reasons. I'm busier, I'm doing this and that. And so in other words, I may be carrying less muscle mass, which means that even though my metabolism per gram of muscle is the same, because you're carrying less muscle, your metabolism tends to be lower. So I think it's a complex question. Your metabolism actually stays the same for quite a long time, but because of what we do or don't do, we end up carrying less muscle mass as we get older. And that is what then drives you into a little bit of a vicious cycle, which is why the weight gain tends to be inexorably in the up direction until you reach your mid-70s to your 80s. Then actually there are very few, even in this day and age, there are very few people in their 70s or 80s or 90s that are overweight. And that's because things start to change. And then your body weight then starts to drop again. So that tends to be the natural life history.
Yeah. Because I spend majority of my time helping people preserve their body mass and their body weight in my clinic.
Exactly.
Because they're really suffering with weight loss. This is so interesting there because it really just highlights things we've spoken about in other episodes about the benefits of weight training. And we're so often told to do cardio for fat loss. And actually what you've just said there is if we want to have an increased ability to burn fat, actually preserving some of our muscle mass as we get older is the right approach.
There's two things. So first of all, your muscle mass clearly does naturally increase your metabolism. There's no other way. People don't drink green tea. That's not going to increase your metabolism. Chili is not going to do that either. But increasing your muscle and exercising will. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you look at healthy aging, because who wants to live forever lying in a bed, right? If you look at healthy aging, the one most powerful indicator for healthy aging is the amount of muscle mass you carry as you go into your older age, independent of how much fat you have. It's all down to how much muscle you carry. So the importance of resistance training as you get older cannot be understated. And I'm not talking about going and pumping iron, okay? If you're 70 years old, yes, some people do. I'm talking about getting up and down the chair, trying to put pressure against the wall, things like that. It's just underappreciated and should not be understated that as you get older, you need to preserve as much muscle mass as you can for healthy aging.
I'm so glad you said that. I think we have a real issue with what is enough. And so many people think, well, I don't want to go and lift weights in the gym, but you are so right. It can be carrying your shopping bags or getting out of the chair. It really is that simple. And we really lose sight of that. I think that is one thing social media has been negative for, is giving these unrealistic ideas of what counts as weight training.
Exactly. And I think don't underestimate the power of moving your own body weight.
Yeah. Like
moving and your own body weight in the up and down rather than a purely cardio perspective, particularly when you're older. Yes. When you're younger, I think we could all do with a little bit of some dumbbells at home, and I'm completely fine. But you have to be realistic. If you paint if you put unrealistic expectations, a large percentage of people will say, hell, I'm never going to do this. I'm not going to do it. And then you lose any benefit that you might actually get.
And on that note, I just want to add that anyone listening who may be older, it's never too late to start.
Correct.
You don't have to have been someone who is active in their 20s and 30s. You can still pick it up in your 60s. So I really hope people are inspired by that. So what about children? I know it's not particularly your area of specialty, but how big of a problem is childhood obesity? Do we think being obese or overweight as a child affects our future ability to manage our weight?
It is an area of my specialty.
It?
Childhood obesity.
Okay,
Yes.
forgive me.
So this is what I still study. The answer is this. I think, once again, there's some nuance here. Undoubtedly, if you end up with obesity or overweight as a child, it's very, very difficult to become unobese as an adult. It just is. That's just the way it is. And so we need to have a really good think, okay, about how we manage the whole aspect of nutrition education, and physical activity in children equitably across all, not only when you are in some posh school somewhere, equitably everywhere. Absolutely critically important. What is interesting, however, is when you downshift back into the genetics I'm talking about, is that there are distinct genes which actually will mark childhood obesity versus genes which end up with obesity as an adult as well. So I think there are a number of different things we have to think about. But undoubtedly, if you end up with obesity as a child, very difficult to become unobese. And it's always easier to prevent something than to try and treat something later.
And what about for a pregnant lady? Does kind of what they eat or their relationship with food during pregnancy affect anything? Because I think I remember at med school once having a lecture about kind of like a scavenger phenotype, and if you're deprived of nutrients in utero, then you may have a kind of tendency to be a bit more greedy in your relationship with food later in life.
So I think it's a little bit overstated, but this study came from the Dutch hunger winter, and the Dutch hunger winter is towards the end of World War II. In winter of 44 to 45 or something like that, there was a brief 6 months period of time in the Netherlands in which there was bona fide famine. Okay, people did not have enough food, and a percentage of those women were pregnant. Okay, and so they were women who were pregnant under a famine. But then when their babies were born into non-famine. They were born into areas. So exactly what you then described. And when you then compare that to women who had a pregnancy during the non-famine bits and gave their baby, then the women who had a baby in utero while during a famine, those offspring, those children had an increased risk, in particular for type 2 diabetes. The obesity thing, maybe a little bit, but definitely metabolic disease. And it's what people have said is sort of like, because your genes don't change, it's the last minute tweaks to the various genes using epigenetics, the marks on your genes, when you're pregnant, right? I mean, when you're in utero, because then it's the best marker of what environment you're about to be born into.
Yeah.
There's not enough food. I better be more efficient. So your scavenger analogy is actually quite good, where they come out. And so suddenly you're more efficient with your food, which means that maybe you store more of the percentage of food you eat rather than burn it. And so, yeah, that is called the Barker-Hale hypothesis.
Yes.
So those are the people that actually Nick Hale's actually one of those authors was the head of department of our head of my department when I first started at Cambridge.
Wow. So we've discussed the problem. It sounds all doom and gloom. You know, we have these genes. What can we do about it? Let's chat about we've covered the problem. How do we fix it? How can someone lose weight safely? And if their genes are telling them to store more fat, should they be trying to lose weight?
Let's deal with the second answer first. Okay, second question first. Look, I think we need to hold two thoughts in our head that carrying too much fat is bad for you, and not to blame the person suffering from the problem. Okay, so I think that's the first thing we got to take away. So ultimately, I do think we still, as a population, as a society, many of us need to lose more fat. So I think that's the first thing. Now, how do you do that? Here is the problem. Now, I think to be fair, if I really knew, I'd be a rich man and I'd go somewhere else. But I think there is a holistic view we need to take. I think there is a slightly smaller scale, what we do in our own house, in the individual. And I think there's a macro scale in which we need to look we just had a change of government, or what we look actually on a societal basis. So you need to control the environment you can control. And ultimately, you need to sort of make yourself, what is the easiest way to lose weight? Eat less. What's the easiest way to eat less? To be more full. Okay. Now that might sound, but that's very difficult to do. And so there are things we can do to be more full. You can eat different kinds of things. If there's higher in fiber, higher in protein, and there are pharmaceutical aids. Like, for example, the new drugs that we're taking, they make you feel more full. So you eat less. So that's the individualized thing you can do. But ultimately, we won't be able to sustainably fix body weight and diet-related illnesses without fixing the food environment that we actually live in. And that requires policy, because we can't change what goes into the supermarket, what stores can open on our streets. That needs to be done by government. And so those are the two things. You need to sort of kind of think about yourself and what you can do. And you need to also lobby people like you and me. We're speaking, these kind of things help a lot. Then we need to make sure that policymakers listen to things like this.
And I think we need to change the culture surrounding food back to how it used to be. If we think about our busy lives, people love a quick fix. So do we really factor in time in our day to prepare lunch anymore? You know, I don't work from home and think, oh, okay, at lunch, I'm going to spend half an hour preparing myself a meal. It's always, how can I maximize my time to work more? So it's much easier to grab something that looks healthy. It wouldn't be that I'm going to go and get fast food for lunch, but I might grab something pre-prepared that looks healthy rather than spending time preparing food. But yet I would still factor in an hour each day to exercise. And we don't see it in the same way. You know, there's not really a quick fix to exercise. We can't just grab something off the shelf and think exercise done.
People wish they could, but no, you can't.
But we can do that for food. So we don't cook anymore.
All right. You ask very complex questions, which is good, which is a good thing. I think we've got to think like this. I think we need to segment society up into how we deal with the various problems. Now, there are going to be middle-class people that listen to this, with all the people in the world respected, but this is true, okay? In other words, we are probably we're largely professionals. We may carve out some time to exercise. We rush at lunchtime. Maybe we might cook for dinner. This is the classic thing that we actually do. And we need to have a different set of advice and policies and things that we could do. We are probably people that wear our glasses and look at the back of the pack and says, there's this much sugar in there. Right? Fine. We do that. But then you also need to take a look at the people who don't have that luxury of that choice. Okay, the people who are in lower socioeconomic status within society, working 2 minimum wage jobs maybe to feed their kids. Okay, we need a completely different solution for them, because everything that we're talking about is gonna make no difference, because ultimately you walk in with a tenner to a store, you still need to feed your kids, whatever we're told to look at the back of the pack or doing anything. So we need to think about solutions that improves the diets of it. We need to make the healthy choice the default choice, so that it's not a choice. And then we can choose to go eat some crap if we wish. All right. But ultimately, if you just take the default because that's what you have, then that's the healthy choice. If that means subsidizing healthy foods, so be it. If that means, dare I say it, legislation to tax foods that are less healthy, so be it. But you can't tax something without making something cheaper. Otherwise, because you still got to feed your family. So I think it's a complex picture. And I think we do need to look at different sectors of society rather than one universal message, because if you do the universal message, you're always going to miss a lot of people out.
Giles for PM. I feel...
Downing Street today,
I feel quite strongly about that, actually, because if I choose to smoke or to take recreational drugs or have a drink of alcohol, I know the risks and I can choose whether to take those risks for my health, and then I could suffer the theoretical health implications of that. For so many people that are choosing what to eat, I don't think the risks actually are that well known. I think we are in a really privileged position that we know a lot about nutrition
Correct.
and
our food literacy is high.
Exactly. And I think there's lots of people out there eating certain diets, oblivious to the risks of them, and we're engaging in those behaviors. And I think it is in somewhat comparable. We just need to have like more autonomy over what we're choosing and more education as to why we're making those choices.
From an evidence-based perspective,
Yeah.
because a lot of it is not evidence-based at the moment.
So I've got so much to ask you and we're running out of time. You are so knowledgeable.
I'm so sorry. I talk too long.
No, I love it. We love it when people talk. So on that then, on an individual level, where does someone start if they want to lose weight? Because you've touched on this and I would like you to go over it, is if you lose weight and you go on a diet, you might be successful in losing weight, but something happens in your body that tries to reverse that. Is that right?
That's correct. So your brain hates it when your brain reverses it. Your brain hates it when you lose weight, because when you lose weight, it doesn't matter if you lose 5 pounds or you lose 40 pounds. Your brain senses it as a reduction in chances of survival. So a big red flag goes up, and what it does 2 things. It lowers subtly. You don't know nothing about it, right? It's completely non-executive. It lowers your metabolic rate subtly, and it makes you hungrier. Wow. We all know this. We all know the first 5 pounds, if we want to lose weight, the first 5 pounds, woo, it's easy. And then suddenly you hit a brick wall. And because it's hungry, because it's actually more difficult. And so ultimately, when you are making a decision to try and lose the weight, you have to make some kind of lifestyle change, because otherwise the moment you snap back to what you were before, the weight will come back up, always. Or if you actually begin, because you qualify for it, for example, begin taking some of these new drugs that are on the market, the likelihood is you'll be on these drugs for a long time. And because the moment you stop those drugs, the weight will always come back on. Weight loss is the easier, quote unquote, of the 2 processes. Weight maintenance is so difficult because your brain doesn't want you to do it.
So are there ways to avoid that? For example, the way you diet or the duration you do it for? Like if you do it more slowly, does that make a difference?
Okay. I think that the speed at which you do it is going to be down to the individual. I think there's some people who like to do it quickly, some people do it like slowly. There are ways. This is not a magic fix. Exercise is awful for weight loss, but actually it's quite good for weight maintenance.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, as you lose weight, your metabolic rate drops, because it's related to your body weight. But whenever you exercise, you temporarily increase the metabolic rate, right? And so you can actually use exercise. Once you've lost your few pounds, whatever it is you're trying to lose, use exercise to help you maintain it. So that definitely is something you can do. And also think about your diet. And if you begin to eat nutrient-dense foods rather than calorie-dense, because calories are blind to nutrients, nutrient-dense food, typically fiber and protein, they naturally make you more satiating. They naturally make you feel a little bit fuller. And so if you mix the 2, okay, where once you've lost the weight, you try and have a slightly higher, a lot higher fiber meal, slightly higher protein meal, and doing some exercise, that would be if you can achieve that, that will help you keep the weight off.
And that just shows that these 12-week plans don't work, because you need to be looking beyond that.
It's got to be along a 12-week plan. I mean, you can use a 12-week plan for the weight loss element to it.
Yeah.
Then they leave you alone. Well, how the hell am I going to keep the weight off? And so it's the weight maintenance that requires most of the help.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think so many people have so much like guilt and shame that they have this big overhaul of their diet, or they get into a fitness regime. They have all this initial success, and then they put the weight back on plus more, and feel really ashamed of themselves, like it was a weakness of willpower. And it isn't, is it?
It isn't a weakness. You're fighting biology. It's biology. And so you just have to, it's just difficult. Even with the advice that I just gave, it's difficult because it's meant to be difficult, because we are in a slightly odd food environment that we are slightly maladjusted to. So we need to sort of muddle our way through. I would like to hope to think that at some point someone will be brave about some of the policy choices that need to be made to at least tackle the food environment that we're in. And then that way that will make us easier, right? Because if we find it more difficult to say no, But if I walk into a shop or a restaurant or whatever it is, and some of the other choices are not there for me to make, well, then it's easier for me because I'm going, well, these are the options. I'm going to pick this option. Whereas if the third option is there, I may pick that option. So let's minimize that third option.
I actually really agree with you. I went, to all places, to a fish and chip shop in Newcastle with my friend who lives there. And it was an unusual fish and chip shop on the beach where it was basically like grilled fish and the most beautiful salads. Like salads you just wouldn't make for yourself. They were excellent. And I genuinely feel like in that moment, when I was faced with this like lovely piece of grilled fish and salad, I wanted to choose that more than the traditional fish and chip.
That is a seriously bougie sounding fish and chip shop.
In the north as well. Everyone has misconceptions about the north. But it was honestly... I wanted to choose that. But if that had not have been on offer, I would have welcomed the traditional fish and chips and mushy peas. And so you're so right about what's on offer to us. But we need demand for the healthier options.
I don't know. I think you need the demand, but you need to build the demand.
Yeah.
And I think just to say, the companies say, people are just buying what we're just making what the public wants. To some degree, I understand that, obviously. But I think there also needs to be some effort to build the demand. And this maybe includes education, maybe it includes doing things like this, so that the opportunities for healthier decisions are there. Because at the moment, the cheapest, easiest option is not the most healthy option.
You mentioned right at the start of the conversation about the reward system in our brain. So if I eat a donut, something's going to reward me in my brain. That's going to make me want more or not be satisfied or seek out that sort of thing again. Can we hijack or manipulate our reward system? Because as I love fruit and veg, but still a plate of vegetables is not tapping into the same reward system in my brain. Can we change that?
The thing about the reward system is this. The reward system lights up whenever you feel nice about anything. Okay? This is not a food-specific reward system. It works the same for alcohol, bungee jumping, sex, whatever. Everything that feels nice lights up the reward system. And so you can, if you are taught as a child that actually... So I think it's very difficult to change it in you and me. This is the problem. If broccoli doesn't do it for you, I don't know how to make it more sexy for you, right? If, however, as a child, because ultimately, this is the example I have. My wife and I, my wife's English, I'm ethnically Chinese. We both love carbs. We're carb fiends, right? But the form of carbs we love are very different. My wife likes it in bread. I can take or leave bread, right?
Oh, no, bread is the best thing in the world.
I can take or leave it. I like mine in rice.
Yeah.
Once again, backing myself into a stereotype. But there we have a genetic drive to love carbs, but the form of which we love it differs. It tickles my brain in a wrong. So what that tells us is therefore we need to tackle the children because we need to get them to taste different things, to feel the same about strawberries as they do chocolate, to get textures in their mouth that don't make them a bit scared, to understand what a fish looks like. But that's got to be done young. You can't shortcut that because once you do it young, then that reward system to do it. It's very difficult to get excited about broccoli when you are 51.
I think for people who are older that are listening to this, the kind of takeaway message there is that we can't change that. That's built in childhood. But what you can do is be more conscious of the reward you're getting. So if I still eat the crap, but it's like, I know it's not the majority of my diet. And if I go out for pizza, I'm like, I'm going out for pizza on Friday night. And this is, something that is maybe less nutritious for me, but it's soul food. I think the issue is when it's unconscious and you're just like randomly eating that on a Monday lunchtime without even thinking about it. You're not really enjoying the reward because you're eating it at your desk whilst doing something else. And it's just like a staple in your diet. And I think that's one thing we can change is just being more conscious.
Think about the whole diet, not the individual meal. So don't be shit. Yes, by all means, you're right. Friday night is the night I have tonight, for example, is the one night I don't cook. I like a takeaway on a Friday night. Otherwise, I cook. Think about your whole diet rather than an individual meal being bad or good for you. To look over the week. And if over the week, actually, that's been okay. That's the way you should function.
Yeah. And that's what I really love about the whole gut microbiome movement at the moment, really focusing on what we're adding into our diet. And if you're eating all the fiber and plants and, a good amount of protein as well, then the odd thing that is is not really going to make a difference. Okay, I really want to just get onto one thing before we finish. You've touched on it, Ozempic.
Yeah.
The medications, gosh, they are causing quite the storm.
Oh, yeah.
From a science perspective, tell me about them. And we can have a balanced argument here, the pros and cons. I think it's people like to criticize anyone that says anything positive about them, but let's give a balanced argument about what these drugs are doing.
Okay, so these drugs, Ozempic is just the brand name. Ozempic is the chemical name is semaglutide, but there's a whole class of them. This is just the first one up there. Are modified gut hormones. So your brain needs to know two pieces of information to influence your food intake: how much fat you have, and how much you've eaten. Okay, so how full you are going to be, and those are going to come from gut hormones. And most gut hormones make you feel full. And so ultimately, the super strength, the superpower of these new fantastic drugs is the fact that the pharma companies have decorated these compounds to make them stick around the blood for longer. And they signal to the brain, they make you feel full, you eat less, you lose weight. So ultimately, that's how they work.
And why? That sounds great.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect. You told me we can't change our biology. Now we have this exogenous hormone that we can come in and somewhat change our biology a little bit. Why is that a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing, I don't think. So, but we need to have a more, but I don't think it's a silver bullet either. So let's just take the whole thing apart. So first of all, there are some side effects. Because of the biology of the system, if you mess around with any gut hormone, it tends to make you it too rapidly. It makes you feel a bit pukey, which is why nausea is one of the side effects. Because gut hormones regulate the flow of food through the tube, sometimes it can come out a little bit fast. Okay, shall we say? That's another side effect. Or sometimes it's a bit slow. Okay, constipation. That's also another side effect. So those are the biological side effects. But ultimately, they're actually quite safe. And their effect size is remarkable. The problem is, and I think it's a fantastic tool for treating the obesity. The problem, it only treats the obesity. It doesn't improve the situation you're in. It doesn't improve your diet. If you already were eating not a healthy diet, all it would make you do is eating less of a not healthy diet, which is fine, except not healthy diets are lower in nutrients, and so you might end up being malnourished if you take this drug. Problem number one. Problem number two is that if you lose weight, and this is not specific to these drugs, if you lose weight relatively quickly, say if I fasted for the next week, I would lose weight, but it would be 50% fat, 50% lean mass, muscle mass. Okay. And so these drugs work so well, you lose weight really quite quickly. You lose muscle mass as well as fat, and no one signed up for that unless you exercise at the same time. So I think there needs to be a big caveat stuck on these drugs in the sense that they are very effective, immensely effective, and ultimately a wonderful and powerful tool to treat obesity. But you cannot use them in isolation. You have to use them as a tool to help you improve your diet, because what these drugs do, I've spoken to people who've taken it, is take away the chatter at the back of the head to think about food all the time, right? And so hence, you can do exercise more. Hence, you can think about, well, why don't I eat this instead of that? Because the overwhelming drive to go for the pizza is now no longer there. You can make choices now when you actually do it. But that needs education, that needs intervention, and then you need to exercise to keep up your muscle mass. So I am pro-drug. Okay, people think I'm a pharma shill, but I'm not, because it ultimately, you're just changing one hormone in your body, one or two, and it works. But they cannot be used in isolation. It doesn't improve your diet, and it doesn't make you exercise more.
And I really think people lose sight of the problem. We're not talking about people who just have a little bit, in clothes, they look like they're a healthy body weight and have a little bit of excess fat. That's not really the problem.
No.
There are really overweight people that may have these genetic predisposition that makes them very severely obese, where there is an imminent risk to their health.
Exactly.
And just in the same way that if I was to prescribe someone a blood pressure tablet, I don't just give them the blood pressure tablet and say, okay, your blood pressure is going to come down. I say, but you can also get your blood pressure down through diet, exercise, all these other things. And it's a bridge to potentially come off the medication if they can build those lifestyle habits. And that's kind of my view, is that it could be a bridge to get you quickly out of the real danger zone, but it's never going to work without all of the other things we've chatted about in this conversation.
And we also need to, at the moment at least, certainly for the foreseeable future, keep it as a prescription only.
Yeah.
Because these drugs work because of the biology of the system, but they'll work whether or not you are 30 stone or whether or not you're a 6 stone, 16-year-old girl. Okay? And so this is a major issue. I think doctors, physicians need to have a line of sight of the human being that gets the drug so they can look and says, well, why are you taking the drug? Sorry, who are you? I went to and I spoke at an event, Elevate, which is the big personal training thing. First time I've spoken to personal trainers before. And the event I did was called Gym or Jab. They're really concerned. They're concerned that the jab is going to destroy their industry. So I went into gym or jab. And it was, we talked about the stuff we talk about. And I got off stage. And someone came up to me and they were talking about the drugs they were getting. And I was looking and says, how did you get this Ozempic? They go, well, I got it online privately. I says, okay. He says, okay, I'll confess. I lied about my weight. What? And so there are people out there getting it privately who have lied about their weight so they can get the drug privately, not in the NHS. Okay, and look, this is now will give the drug a bad name. It will, because then we're going to have people, lying about their weight, people doing something. And the issue is the moment someone dies because they shouldn't be on the drug and they're already skinny, then suddenly the drug, a hugely powerful tool, if used correctly, is removed from the system. And we need to fight against that.
Gym or jab is hugely problematic because it is sending the message that you exercise for weight loss. All of the benefits of exercise are independent of BMI. The benefits on your blood glucose control, on your risk of
mental
diabetes,
health,
your cancer risk, mental health, they are all independent on whether you lose weight or not.
Correct.
So if you go to the gym for 8 weeks and you've not lost any weight, you've still made wonders of impact on your health and future health. So, that's annoyed me. What about this whole blood glucose monitoring? Because we've talked about how it's a really big issue and, there's a real kind of genetic impact here. And fixing the problem is really difficult. So we've talked about how we could maybe eat in a certain way to make losing weight and keeping it off easier. What do you think about the blood glucose element of that?
So I did Land's End of John O'Groats last year.
Oh, wow.
When I turned 50. So in lieu of buying a Porsche, I cycled to Land's End of John O'Groats. But I did it with double blood glucose monitors.
Yeah.
Because why the hell not? I did it with a Dexcom on one and a Libra 3. That's the one that the Zoe app uses on the other. Big manufacturers. Just to see what the hell would happen. And my conclusion throughout the entire process was this. I think these monitors are definitely designed for someone with diabetes. Okay, managing diabetes, wonderful tools. On the one hand, it is giving us information about the one very easy thing to measure that is directly related to how we behave. Okay, so it is a potentially powerful tool because it's immediate to affect change in how you behave. So I understand that. But is it giving the right information? So I guess the one example I'll use is this. Whenever you're exercising, you're eating anything, your blood sugar just doesn't change because your muscles are open up like sponges, sucking in the glucose. If I was sat on my bum and I ate a energy bar, this is what I was eating at the time, high in sugar, obviously, like that. But I was sat down, I was stationary, I was back in the hotel room, right, doing that. My blood glucose levels went up and spiked. If, however, I had that energy bar / chocolate / whatever in context of a meal as dessert, you don't see the spike.
Yeah.
You see the postprandial rise in the normal food you eat and it come back down.
Yeah.
Does it mean that it's suddenly become more healthy for you?
No.
And so that is my problem with the measure just of glucose.
Yeah.
I think it is useful because it tells us how we behave affects something. I don't know if it is the most useful measure for how healthy the item of food you're eating
Of course, because a piece of fried chicken is probably going to spike your blood glucose less than an apple.
Correct.
But when you were talking about the hunger hormones, if you eat something that has lower glycemic index, does that mean you would get less release of the hormones that make you hungry? Because sometimes I find if I have a really fiber-rich, plant-rich lunch, I don't really get hungry in the afternoon. But if I have something sugary for lunch, I get a sugar craving in the afternoon.
Now, the biology there is the same as actually, but just let's even get even closer to the measurement. What happens is if you eat an orange versus drink orange juice. So the when you eat an orange, a number of things happen. Okay, first of all, you're chewing, so your body is ready to receive calories, nutrients. Pardon me. Secondly, your body has to work to extract the sugar from the fiber. Fiber is only present in plants. Thirdly, the fiber comes out the other side, and so it travels through the gut. And the farther down the gut something travels, the fuller you'll feel. And finally, fiber is good for your microbiome. So eating the orange has just a huge amount of things. Good things. The problem is when you drink OJ, orange juice, which incidentally has the same concentration of sugar as Coca-Cola, and it's not better for you than in terms of sugar-wise. It's treated like Coca-Cola. The sugar goes in, it's absorbed very quickly. So you're eating exactly the same food minus the fiber, and your body deals with it very, very differently. So I think that explanation is down almost entirely to the presence of fiber.
I think fiber is one of the biggest kind of neglected nutrients in our diet.
So it's interesting. It's not actually a nutrient in a sense, but it is a nutrient adjacent and is actually hugely, hugely beneficial for you. We don't eat enough of it, hardly.
Well, I think as a society, we have this obesity issue and we actually have a massive malnutrition problem because we're eating the wrong things. Okay, we've talked for too long, but I have final question. First of all, what do you want everyone listening to take away from this topic and this conversation?
I think there's two things. The first is, look, people, there is no one size. I don't want to sound like a fortune cookie, but there is no one size fits all solution. None. Zero. You have to find the solution. If you need to lose weight, that suits you, your lifestyle, and your biology. Are you a parent? Do you work shifts? Don't try and believe that because someone says it's my way or the highway, they're lying 100%. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you're trying to lose weight in particular, it's always going to be difficult. So if you have hard days, it's not because you're a bad human being. It's because your brain makes it difficult. And finally, I think you need to think in the context of your whole diet and not just any given meal, right? Don't think catastrophically where if suddenly, oh my God, I had all this curry / pizza / whatever ice cream, hang it. Screw whatever I'm medicine do. No, mate. I think what you got to do, think in the context of your whole diet. Those are the three things.
If you spill ketchup on yourself, you don't squirt the whole bottle down you afterwards. You know?
Thank you. No, you don't.
We have a little tradition on my podcast where I ask every guest, what is your vision of health? What does health look like to you?
Oh my goodness. The vision of health to me is being able to do whatever it is you want to do and having not that limit you. And if you choose to climb Kilimanjaro, that's your vision of health. If you choose to be able to walk down the stairs, that's your vision of health. If you choose to want to try and be at your daughter's wedding, in the outfit that you want to, that's your vision of health. I think, and it changes. The vision of health changes in your situation, but it's got to allow you to do what you want to do and be happy. That's my vision of health.
Love that. Professor Giles Yeo, thank you so much for your time. What a wonderful conversation. Can't wait to get this episode out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Vision of Health. I hope you've taken away some practical and realistic health advice that you can implement to improve your lifestyle and get clear on your vision of health. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please do let me know by liking the episode and leaving me a review. If you want to hear more from me, then make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you have any friends that could benefit from improving their lifestyle, then make sure you share the episode with them. I'll see you next time.